Welcome to another edition of Conversations Different, a podcast from the Santa Fe New Mexican, where we focus on the interesting people and issues of northern New Mexico. Today, we are doing both with U.S. Representative Teresa Leger Fernández here to talk about her work in Congress. Welcome, Representative.
Muchísimas gracias por tenerme. Thank you so much for inviting me on for this conversation today.
Oh, it's so nice to have you. I was thinking a lot about your life as a member of Congress. You practiced law for a zillion years. You grew up, all the things that you did. What did that prepare you for, like, being in Washington, working, flying back, working, flying back? How do you balance that?
Well, it really did because, every time I left New Mexico, I would get homesick and have to come back. I called it the yo-yo effect, right?
Yes.
And everybody knows this, right? We can't really leave because we love this place so much. So what I get to do now is actually leave with a purpose, which is to take New Mexico's issues to D.C. and then come back and listen to what else we need. And so it's like the perfect kind of job for me who did never really want to leave, but wanted to work on things at a national level, at a larger scale. And then the other thing that I think really was key in terms of the work I did before was I was kind of the last of the general practitioners, right? I worked on everything from healthcare centers to voting rights. I was all over the state on different issues, economic development. So the concept of working on multiple issues at the same time, not having a single specialty, was really helpful because in one day, I can go from major finance issues in Rules Committee tomorrow. We're going to have a lot of finance issues around private equity. We're going to take up issues around crime to, talking about housing to going into an education committee. So it is such a range of issues, and I'm kind of used to that. So I'm a generalist, and so being a generalist in Congress is a good thing.
That helps. And it didn't hurt that when you're passing infrastructure legislation for something like an acequia, you've actually walked one.
I've actually cleaned one.
That is not fun. And it always is in the spring, obviously, and that's when our allergies are the worst. So you're cleaning and wiping your nose at the same time.
Yeah. Well, acequias to me are the most beautiful example of what society should be. Yes. And in a sense, almost what government should be, because we all come together and work for the common good on the acequia madre. And then we each take the water we need for our individual orchards. And we do it with joy and passion. We laugh. We tell stories. If you're really smart, you just make sure you walk and clean next to the oldest member, because then they'll just spend all the time leaning on the shovel telling you stories, and that is the best thing.
That's right. And you learn and you get those to pass on to the next person. One thing that really, I think, sometimes makes me remember how different New Mexico can be from the rest of the country in the best way is when people would move in next door to my folks up in Mora, and they would say, but the ditch goes right through my house. Why don't I get any water? And they hadn't bothered to find out that they needed water rights, not just the ditch. And they could not understand the way things worked on an acequia and how you had to have ownership as well as the presence of the ditch.
And the other thing that we did, because I was actually a commissioner on an acequia to help, run the acequia and to fight back actually some big developments that were coming in and trying to take water off of our acequias. And that just dries up the land, which is probably what happened with these people where, water rights were sold off of the land. And we're trying to really make sure that water rights stay on the land to make sure these communities are vibrant, which is really helpful and important. And having the federal government provide the resources to acequias, which are governmental entities recognized in New Mexico, but making sure that USDA, that FEMA, that all of our different organizations recognize acequias so that we don't have to be educating them over and over again. So me and my team, whenever a bill comes up, we look at it and go, let's insert acequias here. Let's insert land grants so that we don't have to do that education over and over to the federal agencies. Once you do it, they go, okay, we get it. But we want to end the law so that we're not depending on, when somebody changes a job, you have to re-educate them again. So there are wonderful little things we can do that sometimes don't make the news because it's not a big bill we're introducing. It's just cleanup that we're doing with that sensitivity to our local issues.
Right, and that means you have to understand those issues when you go to Congress. So you're going back and you're having a lot of fun right now in Congress because, you have all these great speaker elections, there's impeachment inquiries. Now, obviously, this will run a couple of weeks after we tape it, so we don't want to date ourselves too much. But how do you foresee the next few weeks going, especially with, aid to Ukraine, aid to Israel, just the functioning of Congress to keep everything working?
The biggest thing that we will have accomplished, I think, is that we will finally fund the government.
Yay.
The first 6 appropriation bills, I've read them, looking good. I'm very pleased with what we were able to accomplish. They're going to be consistent with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which, guess what? We passed that back in June, which gave us the numbers. Like, we should have been able to work in June 2023 and get appropriations done on time. Unfortunately, we had, speaker elections. There's been a lot of infighting among the Republicans.
Right.
The Democrats have stood ready to provide the votes on a bipartisan basis at funding levels that were agreed to in June without horrible poison pills.
Right. What makes me wonder how anything gets done is you guys had a deal. It was agreed to by all sides. Then all of a sudden, no, we're not going to keep our word. How do you work with people who don't keep their word?
It was more than a deal. It was law. We passed that into law. And I think it's what we did, which is patience, which was telling the story to the American people. For example, the agricultural appropriations bill that came out of the Appropriations Committee. I sit on the Rules Committee. That takes all the bills right before they go to the floor. Normally, they come here, they come to the Rules Committee. There's 4 Democrats, 9 Republicans, and we sit there. And of course, the Democrats are never going to win a vote with 9-4. But what we want to win is the narrative, not win the narrative. We want to explain to the American people what's going on. So in the agricultural appropriations bill, they had cut it back to 2007 levels. Can you imagine what would happen to New Mexicans if we cut our nutrition programs back that far? If we cut the funding to our farmers and our ranchers back that far? When we were in these debates, I actually asked, sitting in Rules, I asked the chair of one of the committees, what am I going to tell rural Americans with the priorities with what you're doing to them in these bills? And his response was, we need to prioritize. That to me said they're not prioritizing rural America. They're not prioritizing rural New Mexicans. We took that story and we took the story of all the cuts they wanted to do, and we made sure that people across New Mexico knew it, people across America knew it. And so what do we have now? They agreed, right? We had a lot of moderate Republicans whose constituencies heard us tell that story, who said, we cannot cut USDA. So I'm real pleased to report that where they had wanted to cut nutrition programs, where they had wanted to cut women, infant, and children, not feed the hungry, we actually are fully funding the nutrition programs. We got an extra $1 billion for women, infant, and children. Our farmers markets programs, which we love, we're funding them. It's flat funding. We need more. But that's something we were able to accomplish. So even though there's this infighting, when we keep our sights on what we know and we talk about the values and we talk about our communities, we can win. And that's an example of how we were able to do that. It took us, 6 months, 9 months longer than it should have, but we got there.
Oh, that's encouraging news, I think, for everybody, because with one of the worst hunger rates in the country, New Mexico needs those dollars and children need those dollars. And on that note, we will be back in a moment with another segment of Conversations Different.
Thanks, Inez. This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. We hope you're enjoying this episode of Conversations Different with Inez Russell Gomez. Great local content is only possible with a talented staff dedicated to bringing you the best local content possible. For that staff to do its work, we need your support by subscribing to the Santa Fe New Mexican. If you're already a subscriber, thank you. And if not, there's never been a better time to subscribe. In addition to our home-delivered newspaper that comes with full digital access, we also provide digital-only subscriptions for SantaFeNewMexican.com. We'll also be releasing more online-only audio and video programming moving forward. The Santa Fe New Mexican has been here for nearly 175 years, and we want to continue being your source for local news and information. Visit us at SantaFeNewMexican.com/subscribe or call us at 505-986-3010. Thank you.
It's a new day in New Mexico, and the doors to boundless opportunity are open as tens of thousands of New Mexicans reach higher to pursue a dream, broaden their horizons, and retrain for a better job. With the New Mexico Lottery and Opportunity Scholarships, you could build yourself a better future anywhere in the state. You put in the hard work, we'll help with the costs. For eligibility details, visit reachhighernm.com.
We are back with Conversations Different, discussing what's happening right now in our seat of government with our representative, Teresa Leger Fernández. One question I keep asking myself, and you are on the inside, is there any hope at some point that a few Republicans would break away and say we're tired of everything getting stalled by the Freedom Caucus, so let's just elect a Democratic speaker, and maybe I won't win again, but at least I won't go another year with doing nothing?
We are constantly encouraging them to do that.
I thought you might.
We are. I love it. Like Hakeem Jeffries, when he becomes the speaker, and we were pretty confident that we will win the House because of the dysfunction and the chaos that the nation has seen. Right? Yeah. It is well known, but he will be the speaker who has received the most votes in history. And here's a little sort of funny factoid: is somebody did the calculations, and it was my vote during one of the original speaker contests, like speaker contest number 9 or something, and said Teresa Leger Fernández's vote was the vote that made him receive more votes than Speaker Pelosi ever got. And I will continue to vote for Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, and whether we get an extra 2 Republicans this Congress or we elect him outright in the 119.
There's enough retiring that they could just say to heck with it. I want to do something before I go home.
I'll let them know that you wanted to know if they were willing to do that.
Well, Pete McCloskey, for all of them, lives part-time in the 3rd Congressional District. And he is the Republican who was the first one to say, no, Richard Nixon, you're a rat and I'm going to go against you. So, we can have courage like that, every once in a while.
We encourage courage.
Yes.
Yes, we do. And that's an example of what we're hoping, that there will be Republicans who sign our discharge petition to force a vote on the Ukraine aid. It is outrageous and un-American, indeed, as President Biden has said, to support Putin. And right now we have Putin protecting Republicans. They refuse to support Ukraine. He is a murderer. He has intentions to envelope Europe in war, and we need to reject that. It's important for our troops. It's important for our own national security. So we are hoping that we get Republicans voting for that bill. I have a hashtag, let us vote, hashtag let us vote, because if we voted on that, it would pass.
Right. But that's the problem. They don't want it to get to the floor. So how do you get it to the floor if the speaker won't budge?
We have what's called a discharge petition.
Okay.
And every Democrat will have signed a discharge petition, but you need a majority in order to force it to the floor. So we would need those 2 or 3 Republicans to sign the discharge petition, and then it would hit the floor. So we're encouraging.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
So it might have happened by the time people listen to this.
Oh, that would be exciting, because you can't back somebody in a war and then leave them halfway stranded. Mm-hmm. That isn't not just American. It's not fair. In general.
They are literally running out of bullets.
Yeah.
And if they had the resources, the will of the Ukrainian people, we need to remember when Putin first invaded, the common wisdom was that Kyiv would fall within weeks.
Yes.
Because that Russia had overwhelming force. But it was the will of the Ukrainian people that have kept them alive and in this fight until now. We cannot abandon them at this point, especially since Putin has already made very clear his intentions. He wants to reconstruct Russia and what it was. He wants to have an autocracy. He wants to have the kind of empire that they had at one point in time. And anybody who supports him and says he's great and he's marvelous, which too many Republicans are doing, should be ashamed of themselves. And we need to remember Republicans have historically supported a strong America abroad. And so we need to call upon our Republican colleagues.
They need to go back to their traditional values.
Exactly.
Now, obviously, as a member of Congress, you do the big issues like Ukraine, like foreign aid, but you also obviously are focused on your district. So talk a little about some of the top issues. I know getting aid to people affected by the Hermits Peak Calf Canyon fire was huge. That was like $1 billion or so.
No, $4
billion.
Oh, close to $4 billion. It was only $3.95 billion.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and that was huge because that does not happen.
Yes.
We know it was modeled after what happened up at Cerro Grande, but that was a very small amount. It didn't hit $1 billion. So to have $3.95 billion dedicated to compensating all that was lost was huge. But
how about getting it out to people? How's that?
We have been, the delegation, Senator Lujan and myself have been leading the effort, but the entire delegation has been very engaged, pushing FEMA to get it out quicker. People love the navigators. I did the navigators because that's what I had when I went to the cancer center at UNM. It made a huge difference. When you're suffering through a cancer diagnosis, you're lost. Having a navigator help me through all that was important. You're suffering through having lost everything that was important to you. We wanted to have navigators to help walk people through that process. People like that, but they don't like the fact that it's taken too long. I encourage anybody who's listening, get your claim filed. File for flood insurance. The flood insurance timeline is coming up. We want you to file for that before April. It's a great deal. You're going to be able to get flood insurance paid for by the federal government, but only if you show up and apply. We do know that they are working through their deadlines. They've missed deadlines. We're on them. We're pushing them, and they're trying to catch up.
And hopefully, as part of that, the Forest Service will stop setting fires when it's windy.
I think that the Forest Service has hopefully learned their lesson. I called for the initial investigation, which they did, which highlighted everything they did wrong. I also called for a federal independent investigation, which is going to set out what they should do so they don't start those fires when it's windy, so they don't walk away from a fire they think has been put out. They use those infrared drones. They use technology. Those are things I've insisted on that we're starting to do. But there's lots of other things that we do besides the fire that I've had a wonderful time doing.
Right. And let us take a quick break, and we'll be back with our member of Congress, Teresa Leger Fernández, in just a moment.
My name is Maria Jose Rodriguez Cadiz, and I am the Executive Director with Solace Sexual Assault Services. Our mission is to prevent sexual violence and empower survivors of sexual violence through restoring dignity, strength, and resiliency. For almost 51 years, Solace has reduced the impact of sexual violence. We do it by focusing on human rights, social justice, hope, and dignity. We believe survivors are experts in their own experiences and acknowledge that empowering them is crucial to their healing. Our advocacy, forensic interviewing, and therapy services are centered to their needs. Our sexual violence prevention programs in schools and community is just as important. Please check our website at findsolace.org. And if in need, you can call our 24/7 hotline, which is 800-721-7273. Your support is crucial to the lives of survivors. Thank you. Gracias.
We are back with Conversations Different. Congresswoman, tell us a few more things that you are working on that will affect people in the 3rd Congressional District.
Well, something I think is very important is to make sure that people are able to have a home of their own. And so I was able to secure $750,000 to use as down payment assistance. HomeWise is doing that. Contact HomeWise if you want to try to get a little bit of that. Now, $750,000 is going to go really fast. But what I wanted to do was use that as a national model. And so I've introduced the Home of Your Own Act to, at a national level, provide $30,000 to first-time homebuyers if they meet certain qualifications, like in Santa Fe, if you're at 150% of median income, because it's an expensive housing market. In other places, 120%. So that's like something that where we've taken what I've been able to do for Santa Fe, for New Mexico, for my district, and then said, this is a national model. Let's take it nationally. I was able to get into the bill of the ag bill on a bipartisan basis, a tribal nutrition program, so that tribes themselves can run their food programs, their school nutrition programs, so that if they want to do the Three Sisters and feed their children the Three Sisters here in New Mexico, they can do that, or wild rice and salmon if you're in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of issues around mental health and behavioral health, getting funding for specific projects like that. So, money up to Taos, money out to the Navajo Nation, money out to Mora, money to assist with mental health, assist with children who've been hurt, who've been, raped and beaten at home and are pulled into the law, the judicial world. Like, how do we help them with that trauma? So I got a $1.2 million for Roswell to help their, it's called CASA. It's an amazing, I think nationally, should be a nationally renowned model of how they help children recover from that process and actually go to the court to stand in accusation of sometimes a family member who's done these horrendous things. So just a range of issues I've worked on that and they might be something that only benefits one community, like Roswell with the CASA program, but could then later benefit many others. So taking examples from New Mexico and blowing them up so that they can be helpful in many other communities.
And Roswell is a new part of your district. Was it already there?
No, Roswell, Artesia, Olive Portales, Hobbs are new parts of my district. And I have really enjoyed going down and meeting with people, taking infrastructure projects down there, because a pothole isn't red or blue. It just messes up your truck. And I need to tell you, the mayors are very appreciative of the fact that I show up and because they had, as one puts it, this little lady has shown up more than any other congressperson we've had. So I'm the little lady who shows up and tries to serve the communities who are now part of my district. I love the fact that I have such a diverse district. And when I talk about diversity, it's not just, we have Native Americans make up 20% of my district, but it's also our different rural areas, from Santa Fe. I'm the first congresswoman who was born and raised on the eastern side of the Sangre Cristo Mountains to represent this district, which is important because it's a good portion of the district is on the eastern side of the Sangre Cristo.
Well, the land,
also beautiful.
That's what I'm going to say. The land, anyway, if not the people.
Oh, no, the people too.
Yeah.
After Santa Fe is my biggest city, but then after that, I have Roswell and Hobbs and Artesia and Portales are my next biggest cities.
Wow, so they're overshadowing your hometown.
Oh, nothing can overshadow my beautiful hometown. Love San Miguel County.
It is, and San Miguel County is an interesting place, obviously, because it has the town, it has the college, but so many people there are going back to the farm on weekends or, taking care of their cow at their aunt's place or whatever. So there's a real urban kind of dichotomy, which is in the bigger district and then in the country.
Well, I think that, like when the fires were happening, played off of Kennedy's We're All Berliners Now.
Yeah.
Ich not Berliner was Todos somos norteños. We're all norteños.
Yeah.
Because so many people have moved to Santa Fe, to Rio
Albuquerque.
Rancho, to Albuquerque.
Yeah.
their connections to our rural areas are very strong, and people hold on to their land. I've done a lot of work in the agricultural bill. I held farm to Congress conversations around my district to build legislation for the Farm Bill that would, for example, a Women in Agriculture Act, because women kind of get left out, right? Yeah. My WEST Act, WESTs, so that we can recognize that the USDA programs need to acknowledge the arid conditions in New Mexico, which is different than when you're ranching and farming in Massachusetts or Iowa.
A place where there's water.
Exactly. But it's important, right? Yeah. Our agriculture is huge in New Mexico. Yes. Our pecan crop is second largest pecan crop. Lots of dairy farmers. Our chili, of course.
Yeah. I was at a farmer's market in Georgia earlier this year, and I bought a bag of pecans to bring home because they were made in New Mexico, and they were sold on the things that I tweeted it, and I was like, look, we're going to beat you in your home state.
Exactly. And I'm very proud of that. In fact, the pecan growers will benefit significantly from my WEST Act.
Wow, I love that. So it sounds like you really like delving into the weeds of policy.
I'm a policy wonk. I always have been. I've always been somebody who's worked on issues and deeply on the issues. Remember, my law firm was called Leger Law and Strategy because, I won every time I went into court. But a lot of my work was actually building community. Small things can do big things. Small places can do big things, but you need to give those small places the resources they need, which is why I'm so excited about the infrastructure law that we did, because that's bringing the infrastructure you need. Bring broadband, like the connectivity, the affordable connectivity program. We have about 52,000 people utilizing it in New Mexico, getting the help with their internet bills. That's something that we did with the American Rescue Plan when the pandemic was raging. Remember how bad it was? When they ask you, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I think everybody needs to say yes, right? Yeah. It was dark. We were passing the red chili to pour over our mashed potatoes. You can't pass that over Zoom. Remember, we were having Zoom Thanksgivings.
Yes.
Because the pandemic was raging. Our businesses were closing. People were dying. Oh. And now, look, we passed that bill. We got the vaccines out. We saved our small businesses. We made sure our local governments didn't go under. And look at where we're at now.
Right. And now school children, because of increased connectivity, aren't going to have to go to the McDonald's parking lot to do their homework.
Yes, except for here's something. We did a lot. The Democrats and Biden did a lot with the American Rescue Plan. They're expiring. And so this is another area where we need our Republican counterparts to recognize that affordable connectivity program was so important that we cannot let it expire. It expires in April. We're calling upon our Republican colleagues to help us out and to join us in funding it again. It's worth about $50 million for New Mexicans in terms of what the benefits we're getting here. And there are different ways in which we have worked hard to bring down costs. Like never before have you had negotiations with pharmaceutical companies, right?
Insulin,
right?
And everybody in their, all of our relatives practically are diabetic. So that's a huge one in this state.
Right. That's a big one. Yeah. And the caps on out-of-pocket payments that you'll be making are huge. Mm-hmm. Something people don't realize is we brought down the caps on the Affordable Care Act, your premiums. People would be paying twice as much if we hadn't passed the Inflation Reduction Act. We cut premiums. They were set to go up. And we need to make sure people know that we have been working really hard to bring down costs, bring down energy costs. Because once again, that Putin war, when he did that caused inflationary pressures on gas prices. And so we should be extra mad at him and not support him because look at what he did to inflation in America.
And which caused real pain. Just to maybe one last question. I know that the money that pays victims of the government, basically who were near nuclear sites kinds of things, is running out. And it still hasn't included our downwinders. But we're closer on that. Is that correct?
So the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act was passed in 1992 to recognize that the United States sort of exploded nuclear bombs above ground, and we mined the uranium, and people died because of that. They got very sick. They got cancers and other illnesses. For some reason, which I don't want to spend time at, New Mexico was left out. So
where they created the bomb and exploded it to begin with.
Everybody knows that, right?
Yeah.
And so we have been working. I'm carrying on the good work that Udall did, that Ben Ray did in the House, and Senator Lujan is now doing in the Senate, to expand the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act to include the original Downwinders, to include the miners who worked in the mines in Grants and Navajo. And after 1971, they're no longer, if you worked after that, you don't get compensated. We're working really hard on that. Oppenheimer is going to win awards.
That's right. Probably going to be the best picture, which we'll all know by the time this airs.
Yeah, I know. But and they say the untold story. No, the untold story is the fact that New Mexicans were left out of that compensation. The untold story is like when they talk about, it's not just what happened in Nagasaki and there. It's also what happened in New Mexico. We were left out, and we are working hard to include the Downwinders, and that is what justice looks like. And we are calling upon the Republican leadership to join us. But I want to give a call out. This is an issue that Senator Hawley, who's a Republican, has been leading.
Do you know his wife's from New Mexico?
I did not know that.
She is from a ranching family up north. In fact, they probably live in your district.
Oh, I'm going to have to go talk to her about. See, it makes interesting coalitions, right? We're working together with Senator Hawley. Senator Lujan have done amazing work in the Senate. My Republican leadership, my Democrat leadership supports us getting this in the bill. President Biden had a wonderful conversation with Tina Cordova from the Tularosa Downwinders when he was in Belen for the wind manufacturing plant. So we need to get Republican leadership to join us in this effort.
But even if they're not added, the whole act is expiring, isn't that right?
The whole act expires in June. And so I can tell you, we're not giving up. We're not going to let it expire. But what we need to do is make sure that it gets expanded to include the original Downwinders and all of the uranium miners.
So non-expiration and expansion, and that will be what you're working on as you go back to Congress as a brave fighter from the North, as Bill Richardson used to say. And with that note, we will be back again next week with Conversations Different.